I'm Sarina Fazan, taking a risk, making a difference, and changing the course of your life. Remarkable stories from people defying the odds. You're listening to On the Record. Hi, everyone. It's Sarina Fazan. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of On the Record. I am thrilled to have with me prominent criminal defense attorney Paul Sisco, joined by investigator Jim Rathmann. The three of us worked together on Joe Exotic, Tigers, Lies, and Cover-Up. What an experience. Please introduce yourselves.
Hey, good morning, Sarina. Paul Sisco. Got to meet Jim during the course of this, actually, so thanks for having me on.
No, I love having you on. And Jim, I mean, you're a retired homicide investigator. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Spent some years working the road as a deputy to undercover narcotics, and eventually made my way to detective division, where I did work some homicides. Then advanced my career into the United States Secret Service. So I protected President Barack Obama, the first family, Vice President Joe Biden. Spent some time with Mitt Romney when he was a presidential candidate, and protect a lot of number one and number twos from all around the world. So it's been quite the experience and the journey.
Thank you for your service to this country.
My pleasure.
Paul, just to paint a little bit about you as well, though, you are born and raised in Tampa, correct?
Pretty much. Born in Texas, but by 68, when I was one, I made it all the way over here with my family, actually.
I didn't know that. Oh, really? At 1 year old, you come with your family? You didn't come all by yourself? Okay.
So I've been here, a Tampa kid since the 60s. I went to Chamberlain High here and went away to college, came back, worked at the state attorney's office in the 90s, and for about 6 years. And then been in private practice doing defense work since about 98.
And you're such a good pillar of this community, I have to say.
Well, I appreciate that.
It's the truth. It's the truth. So guys, okay, so let's talk about this whole Joe Exotic phenomenon. Why do you think people are so obsessed with the Joe Exotic, Carole Baskin saga? Both of you, just feel free to jump in.
I just think it was the perfect storm. I mean, you had the pandemic that just came about. Everybody's locked up in their house looking for things to do. Probably watched everything on your DVR within a few days. So it's like, what do we do? And then all of a sudden this docu-series comes out and everybody was just captivated by it. And, it was some interesting characters that lived crazy lifestyles. In addition to that, it was a train wreck. But you couldn't take your eyes off of it. You had to keep watching it. But then, it also kind of foreshadowed a little bit of some real life stories that were going on, specifically with Don Lewis and his family and what they're experiencing and going through. So it's just kind of like a perfect culmination. Everything came together at once.
Well, it was that. And, it's not like when we were kids on TV where it's on once. And if you missed something during the commercial, you couldn't rewind it. I mean, we have the ability to see what this is all about. And it started with me where I'm getting texts from buddies I hadn't talked to in a long time saying, are you watching this? Is this real? And, there was a lot of that going on around the country where people are like, can you believe these folks? I mean, the personalities were really interesting. And it was the perfect storm with COVID and so on. But you also had, some pretty unique characters here.
And Paul, honestly, I watched the show because of Paul and your wife, Michelle, who said, you need to watch the show. And I know I started to watch it too. And I was thinking, this could not be real. But I was actually the MC for Carole Baskin and her fur ball, way back, in the day. But Paul, you were a prosecutor at the time when Don Lewis vanished.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this too, Sarina. What's interesting to me about that is I didn't really know that case then, and you normally would have. I mean, I knew most of the unsolved cases around town at that time, and there's always been a lot of them. Hillsborough's always had its share, and I didn't know anything about that. Sort of over the years, I heard about the Tiger Rescue place, but it was always, to me, it was a place where some of my clients could do community service work. I didn't know any backstory really about it until it started coming to light with the show.
So Jim, with you now, and that is a good point, because I know I feel like you're so in tap with things that are happening. And it is one of those cases when they asked me to talk about it too, and I'm talking about investigation discovery. I told them I didn't live here at the time, but I was surprised that it wasn't as high profile, I guess I should say. So Jim, with you, how did you start getting involved with it in the first place?
Well, much like everybody else, I was watching it. They got to that one episode where it talked specifically about Don Lewis, and there was just some indicators, some certain things said. And, I have all this experience with being able to investigate. So I did a little bit of preliminary research on my own and thought, you know what? I think I can lend a hand here and help out, because I just think there's some information out there that can be uncovered that could really help bring this case to closure, whether it's closure for the family, whether it's justice, whether he can be found, just something. I wanted to bring something to the table. In addition to that, I had a terminally ill father at the time.
So sorry.
He has since passed. And so looking at what Don Lewis's daughters were going through and their family and friends, they haven't had any closure at all. And so that kind of played on me a little bit, like, I have a place to go now to memorialize my father. They never had that in 23 years. And I can't imagine what that's going to be like. So I wanted to be able to just lend a helping hand. And so that's what I did.
Well, how did Investigation Discovery find you, though? Like how did that all come to fruition?
Yeah, so back then I was doing a podcast. And so I just kind of looked at it, looked into some things, got some information, did a few interviews, had some informants come forward with some information. And so when I started putting all the pieces together, I started to actually do that on the podcast. And it ended up getting into Investigation Discovery, heard about it and wanted to talk to me. And I said, sure, you guys can follow me around as I investigate this. That'd be great. So beautiful thing.
Well, let me ask you both. And Paul, we had, in fact, in this very office, we talked to you about this case. But 23 years later, from a criminal attorney standpoint, what are some of the stumbling blocks of this case?
Well, there's a phenomenon going on, which I've noticed, which I don't think was real obvious at first, of what's going on in these kind of cases, which is one like this where, Mr. Lewis went missing in 97, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Was just on the cusp of this technology we have now where everyone's on the internet. I mean, if you were on the internet in 1997, it was likely just some kind of inner office deal, not much going on. And that's why, word didn't get out about a case like this as much. But here we are now all these years later, and look at the information that's turned up through Jim and other sources. You have people's writings. You have somebody commenting on it in a blog in, Omaha, Nebraska, and somebody in Seattle. And you have all these essentially detectives working on something. And so what's essentially happened is new life has been breathed into a lot of these old cases simply by the amount of information that's out there. And a lot of it's not any good, but a lot of it is.
Well, let me ask you guys, 23 years later, though, can information and evidence be resurfaced, and can then it be prosecuted?
Well, there's statute of limitations on certain things, but there's not in the state of Florida on first-degree murder. There is no statute of limitations. And if, in fact, foul play to that level was involved, this is a prosecutable case. Every day you're reading about how DNA evidence has been discovered that they didn't know existed. Things that weren't even important to them in 1997 could suddenly be the difference in making a case or not. You find a stray hair that might have been put in an evidence bag back then that they couldn't do anything with, now has extreme value. So
Right.
It's happening every day. And, Jim solved one of these in Louisiana.
Right.
I mean, technology is just one of those things we have at our side now. I mean, you can, back in 1997 and 1998, and I've been asked this question a lot, people are like, how did they not know about property transfers that have taken place? Well, back then it was different. You'd have to go to the courthouse. You have to fill out the paperwork. They then have to go through the back and then, dig through it and find the hard copies. And it takes time. Whereas now you can literally go onto a website, put in what you're looking for, and within seconds, you can have 30 or 40 properties underneath that person's name. So that really is a big game changer when you have technology on your side.
Were you surprised at some of the things that you uncovered? And can you talk about some of the big things?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that came about, really a lot of it was put into motion when I was able to interview Kenny Farr's ex-wife, Trish Farr.
And for people who may not know, I mean, Kenny Farr played, when I say played, he did not have a huge presence in the Tiger King. He was just, the handyman, right? For the properties.
He was the handyman. And so initially you wouldn't think a handyman has a big process in this. And in all fairness, he could still come forward and have valid reasons for whatever took place back in 1997. In all fairness. But what we found were some property transfers that happened 1 month after Don disappeared. So what's odd about that is typically if your spouse is missing, you're not looking to get rid of your partner's properties and what they've worked hard for. You don't know what their wishes are with that. So to give that to a handyman, again, a handyman, and you're talking well over 6 figures worth of properties for a very small amount. Now, I know that their reason behind it was that they're trying to help him get into real estate. I don't know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's a month after your husband is missing. So those pieces there are really inconsistent and do not make a lot of sense. And so as an investigator, you always want to be able to follow the money, be able to rule out the family. That's kind of the first places you go to when you do an investigation. But you really want to know, was this a method of payment? It's a possibility. Of course, they can come out with their own answers, but as an investigator, that's what you're going to think of. Is this potentially a payment to do some dirty work?
So, Paul, what do you think about that?
Well, there's a perfect example of some evidence that if that was 25 years ago in 1997 and you were trying to put together what properties might have transferred, you'd have to wait in line at a clerk's office and sort of explain to maybe a cranky clerk why you need this report or this deed that's 20-some years old. And now you put somebody's name in and you can suddenly pull those up in, 30 seconds. Right. And you're looking at them. And, Jim and people in our business have become very adept now at gathering information like that. And it's remarkable. And frankly, the sort of joy I have out of that is whether these cases get solved or not. I get a certain schadenfreude, I guess, of the anxiety that might cause the actual perpetrators in something like this.
So can you talk about that? Because that's a really, really good point, because now there is so much light being shed, right, on this evidence. So can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, what I find is there comes a point in a lot of these cold cases where there's just the victims or the victims' families are ready to give up. And it always strikes me that at the end of the day, no matter what, as long as they're keeping the case alive in some form and they're pursuing it, somebody's in a bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and waking up and wondering, are they going to find out more about what I did? Are they going to be able to link this together? And that gives me I don't know, maybe it's twisted. There's a certain satisfaction to people that might be doing evil things like this, knowing that somebody is still on their trail, no matter how cold it is.
That's very, very true.
Do you feel the same way, Jim, about that?
I absolutely do. When you commit some horrendous crimes on other people, it's always going to be in the back of their mind. And as technology advances, they become more and more nervous and probably more paranoid on what can be found. So a lot of times, they may be in the shadows and you don't know exactly where they're at, but they're always paying attention. They may be listening to the podcast that you're speaking about or the news report that you're on, or they're constantly researching it online, putting into Google about the crime that they may have committed to see what new information is out there, because they want to be able to stay ahead of it at the same time we're trying to catch them. So as technology advances, it gets harder and harder for them. So
as an investigator and as a prosecutor, do you feel, and a former prosecutor, do you feel that sometimes these mistakes or the interest in their own, in their own case can lead to the capture?
Oh, absolutely. Because I think it's part of the persona of some of the folks that would do things like this. They're, first off, massive egos generally, incredibly self-involved folks. And what you sometimes find is, why is that person following this case still? Why is this case relevant to them? You'll start interviewing them and they'll say, well, I noticed this happened. And you're wondering, well, why were you paying attention to it even? And that's interesting because the sort of the psyche of a person who has the ability to do that is the same one who sort of wants to, the curiosity kills the cat, Many times in my career as a defense lawyer, whether it be a white collar offense or something, many times my assistant has heard me say, quit being curious, stop. Because, they're going to potentially turn over some document or go looking for something and somebody's going to make a note. Hey, why was this person looking in this clerk's file, in this year? And so it's difficult for them to sort of get away from their strange infamy, notoriety.
No, you're absolutely right. Egos.
100%. So Jim, before we go to a break, and I know it's a very long case, but tell us about the cold case that you solved that led investigation discovery to you, in hopes of solving the Don Lewis case?
Yeah, I mean, I was a part of, we were approached when I used to do this podcast, and I'm not legally allowed to speak about a lot of it right now, but I was a part of an investigation on a cold case. It was a 15-year-old cold case, and got the files and started combing through it. And sometimes a new, fresh set of eyes and technology being on your side, you're able to link some things together that people didn't see before, and that just opens the case wide open, and then you can, put the pieces together and hand deliver a nice package to law enforcement or to prosecutors to go ahead and do their job.
And hopefully we will get closure on this Don Lewis case. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about, I'm going to ask the gentlemen on what they think happened to Don Lewis, and more about, could we see more episodes of Investigation Discovery, which would be really exciting. All right, we'll be right back.
This podcast is brought to you by Core Shorts.
Me being a professional hockey player, I have had my share of groin injuries in my life. When they showed me this product, I said, oh my God, this is the future. These shorts are exactly what they're meant for, to create some support throughout your pelvis. It's an amazing product. It's not only for hockey, it's for any kind of sports, recreational, postpartum. Women after their pregnancy need support throughout their pelvis. These shorts are creating that support throughout their pelvis. So it could be a mailman, it could be a fireman, it could be someone working in their gardens. Doing anything, if you're active, you need some support throughout your pelvis. That's what Core Shorts were designed.
For more information and to place an order, visit coreshorts.com.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. I have Jim Rathmann here, former retired, you are an investigator now, retired homicide detective, prominent criminal defense attorney. Paul Sisco, thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about this whole phenomenon with Joe Exotic.
I've got a quick question, though, Jim. Like, how are you retired already? How old are you exactly, and how do I do that?
Hey, I did my fair share of time, and on to the next part in the private sector. What can I say?
I'm curious to hear how that works.
We'll talk about it.
Thank you.
So, gentlemen, what do you think happened to Don Lewis? Can you talk about that? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think to start out, the theme needs to be, I don't know, because we don't know. But as I told Jim and you, when that show was being investigated, and still is, of course, there sure are reasons to keep kicking rocks over, and motivations of people are always what you want to see. Why was this person motivated to do this? Was that behavior odd? People do odd things all the time, and they do it for no reason or a good reason. But those lead you to the next rock, and it's frustrating oftentimes because, as Jim will tell you, the answer to one good question gets you 10 more questions. It doesn't get you answers. And there comes a day, theoretically, where you kick over enough rocks and you're going to find probably the right witness who knows something, whether it be a piece of evidence or not. Usually the case ends because somebody's going to tell you how it happened, and you just got to find who that person is and why. What's the button you're going to be able to push that's going to make them feel compelled to tell you?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at this case specifically, I really do feel that there's foul play involved. I'm telling you, there's definitely some foul play involved with this. Who and why is still being investigated, and we're finding out new information every day. This isn't over with for me, even though we had our first series show up on TV. There's still a lot more that's been going on, and a lot more information has been uncovered since then. So it's only going to keep progressing forward. So I don't want to tip my hat to what that could potentially be. What I will say is, much like what Paul was talking about, it's finding that right witness. And you got to keep in mind, it's been 23 years, right? So people that could be involved with this, 23 years of having this on your conscience weighs very heavily on you. They could decide, you know what, I need to make a wrong a right. Maybe they have children of their own now that are grown up, that they don't want something like that to happen to them. They would want to know. There's many reasons why they may decide, I really want to get this off my chest. Also, what helps is when you find the right information and they know, wait a minute, if I get a criminal charge here, and let's say their age is, let's say they're 55, 60 years old, and they're looking at 15 years, that's a life sentence.
Right.
So it's all the more reason to want to talk, because they want to be able to see their grandkids grow. They want to be able to see, the rest of them, and be able to live the rest of their adult life and not have this burden on their chest. So there's many reasons why. Maybe they were on drugs back then. They're clean now. It's their good deed. You never
Jim
know.
is such a cop, okay? Let me just say this. And he's absolutely right. And for all the reasons he's saying, oh, they want to get this off their chest and they have a short time, I'm thinking to myself, don't talk. What are you doing? There's going to be the defense lawyer in many people's ears, right? Saying, are you kidding me? You're going to talk to Rathmann? But the reality is the reality is that's part of the psyche. Okay, some of these folks where you're thinking there's not a thing in the world that's going to catch them other than them running their mouths. Many lawyers across the country, the cliche they use is they've got their bass on the wall, and they'll say, how he got caught? He opened his mouth. The reality is most criminal cases don't get made unless the perpetrator starts talking.
Well, Paul, let me ask you, with so much attention on this case, we've heard, attorneys coming forward saying that they're going to offer pro bono services if anyone, wants to speak. In fact, Jim, when you talked to Kenny Farr, you even mentioned that in the show. Yep. So could there be some protection for people all these years later?
Absolutely. And part of that is I'm having fun with Jim here about it. But the reality is that, they could cut deals, anywhere from absolute immunity, where they can't be prosecuted for anything they say, to forms of limited immunity. It's the creative ability to cut a deal between the prosecutor and that witness. Now, one thing I did hear come up is I've heard a lot of law enforcement talking about offering immunity. That's not how it works.
Right.
Okay, explain that, though, because we have heard that, right? But it comes from the state attorney's office.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's got to be the prosecutor who makes a decision as to whether or not absolute immunity or a portion of immunity or no immunity is going to be granted. That's got to be a legal decision that's made. Now, law enforcement might make suggestions.
Right. And we could go and make suggestions, or, the defense attorney is there with their client, and, but that decision is going to be made from the defense attorney speaking directly with the prosecutor. And it's two attorneys being able to discuss it legally and what their scope is of what. And also what's really important too is what exact information does this person hold? They're not going to give full immunity to somebody that, has such a minor, small part. But if you're able to put all the pieces together and connect all the dots and be able to back that up, and you're going to be truthful to what's going on, you have a better shot. But that is something, as law enforcement, we can make the recommendations by all means, but that's really up to the attorneys to discuss behind closed doors.
Well, and the worry about that, from a prosecution standpoint, if you're thinking about, say you bring in Mr. X in a case like this, and he tells his lawyer, hey, I know where Mr. Lewis is, or I know what happened here, and you give him immunity, or anything you tell us here today is not going to count against you. And he tells you that he's got 3 bodies he's buried in the backyard during the course of that. Well, you've given him immunity.
So that really does happen.
That can happen.
That can happen. Wow.
And the last thing you want to do as a prosecutor is, end up flipping the gunman in a robbery against the lookout, and that frequently will happen because you have wily defense lawyers oftentimes, and you have wilier, potential witnesses out there that are thinking, boy, this is the way to my sweetheart deal I need.
Well, I would be remiss if I did not ask you guys this question. And once again, these are just allegations, accusations. But Carole Baskin is not a very well-liked individual. I mean, I think that's a fair thing to say. I'm not saying that I do, I don't. I'm just saying the perception of her. And there are a lot of allegations out there that she had something to do with this. Jim, I want you to weigh in on it. But Paul, I also want you to weigh in. She's speaking a lot, though. She's making appearances and Dancing with the Stars. They're saying that she may even have her own show. Shouldn't she not be saying anything at all during an investigation, an active investigation?
Well, I can tell you this. If you're the defense lawyer looking at that, maybe you're saying, well, she doesn't have anything to hide. Go on Dancing with the Stars, be on a show here. That's the sign of a clear conscience. There's a lot of people that never get charged that are very dislikable people, or a lot of likable people that have done horrendous things. I don't know Miss Baskin other than what I've seen on television here and there. And there's certainly not enough for me to sort of impute her publicly. But I will say that It sure would be nice for some questions to be answered from an investigation standpoint. I know Jim would like to talk to her probably. She might well have completely innocent explanations or no recollection of these things, but it would advance the case.
And she's not talking, right, Jim?
Well, no, she's not talking. And I think with what you had stated in the beginning, you either love her or you hate her. I don't think there's a gray zone there. It's either
she's very
what
polarizing.
side it is that you feel, and that's it. So I know she has probably a good number of fans, just as many as dislikes. But when you look at this case specifically, I think there was a lot more involvement, and I think that's what has a lot of people looking at her going, what the heck? She didn't allow law enforcement to search her property. She didn't take a polygraph. She did not put up missing person flyers anywhere, offer a reward for someone with information that brings him back home. There was no pleas for help. There was none of that. A lot of his junk was removed completely off the property within 2 weeks of him being gone. We know that his cell phone, it could be potentially his only lifeline, was turned off just 2 weeks after he was missing. Giving away his properties a month later, the demeanor that she has, and in all fairness, she could come out and have perfect explanations for why these happened.
Just as Paul
But
said, right?
as of right now, that has not happened, and it makes it look a little suspicious. That's not typically the behavior of somebody that just lost their loved one. You're acting as if you're already moved on. This person's not coming back, and they're not coming back, which is why that behavior can speak for itself. So I think that's what has a lot of people kind of tuned in and like, why didn't you help? Why didn't you answer these questions? Why aren't you doing more for your missing husband? You say you love him so much. Why aren't you out looking for him?
The irony of this one is Miss Baskin and Joe Exotic push each other's buttons like no two people I've ever seen. It's like the most toxic relationship I've ever seen. And the one person that gets Miss Baskin talking more than anyone else is Joe Exotic, speaking through his surrogates or otherwise. And as soon as Miss Baskin talked, do I think that Miss Baskin in large part is on Dancing with the Stars because somewhere in a federal prison, Joe Exotic has to watch that, and it just makes him insane.
They hate it.
There's no love.
There's no love there. That's for sure. That's for sure.
And it gets them talking. It's almost like, boy, you would love to steel cage match. Just put them in the same room and have them converse with each other.
Right.
Just find out what comes out.
Wouldn't that be fascinating?
It would be great.
Okay, so in closing, with this podcast, do you feel that this family, the Don Lewis family, will ultimately get closure?
I think at some point they're going to get a lot of answers. I'm hoping that they'll get full closure and know exactly what has happened. But it's going to take some key people to come forward and provide some critical information that can lead to that. Otherwise, we'll just have to keep digging, and there's no telling how long that can take. But we're sure a whole lot closer now than we were 23 years ago.
Well, closure is one thing, right? Justice, Paul. Do you think the family could get justice?
Well, that's the harder question, right? But Jim's so right. You want to find, God, at a minimum, can we find remains if he's not around? Can we get some closure in that respect? And I don't want to put odds on that, but I would probably put it around 10% max that remains, or the physical body, or he might turn up somewhere. No higher than that. But then take that 10% and exponentially make it even harder and say, is it going to be a prosecutable case?
Right.
Boy, that is a long haul to go.
It's a long haul. I mean, right now, the only thing you have is a bunch of circumstantial evidence, but you don't have a smoking gun. And until you find remains, you find a meat grinder that maybe has DNA left on it. You find something that is like, wow, we can work on this and now put it together because we have this right here sitting in front of us where you can use technology on your side with it. It still remains to be seen, but.
And that's why this immunity question in this is so interesting. And there's a case in Pinellas currently where, in fact, it's gotten some notoriety where a medical doctor was killed in his home. And the handyman in that particular case, or a person who worked at the house, has pled to a lesser degree of the homicide. But he says, to some extent, we believe that it was a conspiracy involving a contract hit and a family member. Well, it's been 8 years, I believe, or 5 years, something like that, since that happened, and they still haven't brought the case against the person he wants to implicate. So you have a prosecutor who's got to have a belief that you're going to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, a reasonable likelihood of conviction. And apparently they haven't reached that point yet over in Pinellas on that case, because, you know, basing a case just on the guy that wants a deal is a very impeachable type witness.
Well, this is certainly a case that so many people are closely watching, and who knows, there might be even more episodes on Joe Exotic, Tigers, Lies, and Cover-Up. So I certainly appreciate you gentlemen joining me, and they're going to be back on another podcast where we're going to talk about another missing case that's, I mean, close to all of our hearts, I think, because all three of us have kids. So we hope you join us for that one. As always, thank you for watching. You can find me on all my social media platforms, and we always appreciate the support.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thanks, Sarina. Appreciate it.